Hey, cyberspace, this is Rich Stroffolino with Gestalt IT here for another weekly episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown, where we kind of go through the news of the week, the enterprise IT news of the week, not just general entertainment news, sports news, that kind of thing, and just kind of give our take. I'm joined, of course, by the networking nerd himself, Tom Hollingsworth. Tom, thanks for being on the show, program, and episode.
Thanks for making sure to put the appointment on my calendar so that I had something to do, Rich.
That's really why we started this, is just to mitigate some loneliness, Tom. I hope it serves its purpose. All right, first kind of big news of the week here. We have the Supercomputing Conference going on in Denver right now in the Mile High City. Lots of interesting announcements going on there. Some of that doesn't quite touch on enterprise IT, but one of the major themes that seems to be coming across this year, and this has been a growing theme for sure, is that Nvidia is just kind of eating the data center as everything moves to as more and more organizations are looking to adopt machine learning, artificial intelligence, insert buzzword here for, highly parallel workloads. Nvidia is just appearing everywhere. We're seeing this. They just actually announced, the company themselves announced that they're expanding their GPU cloud for high performance computing, which fits in with the theme of the show. We have Dell EMC launching machine learning focused power edge servers that feature up to 4 Tesla GPUs, and everything seems to be around that. Nvidia seems to have their fingerprints all over this show. I mean, Tom, obviously not surprising, but is Nvidia now the 800-pound gorilla in the room?
For these specific workloads, yeah, I think they are. NVIDIA's always done a really good job of breaking down workloads using CUDA cores and things like that to accelerate parallelized operations, which of course machine learning just loves. I mean, that's really where they kind of overtook ATI. If you look at ATI, they're still kind of focusing on the gaming market. The Bitcoin is still a thing for them. But yeah, when you get into enterprise workloads, NVIDIA just kills them time and time and time again. And I think that NVIDIA is going to use that as a launching pad to really kind of start positioning themselves as a credible alternative to Intel in that space, which would be one of the reasons why Intel seems to have partnered up with ATI, as we reported last week.
Well, and also just announced that they are fully on board to reinvigorate their GPU unit. It's kind of the Larrabee 2.0, but they're very much aware that they could get lapped, or they're already getting lapped by Nvidia in this market, and that they really need to jumpstart a lot of their efforts. It's funny. I remember when CUDA first launched, I was always flummoxed. I was like, why is this a big deal? I mean, it's just video transcoding, right? Like, who cares if your handbrake app runs 20% faster? But clearly, Nvidia eye on the ball. The other kind of major news, really interesting news coming out of there, is in the realm of composable infrastructure. That's kind of a term that HPE has owned for a couple of years now, or at least they've kind of popularized the concept. But there's a company called Liqid that's just announced general availability of their composable infrastructure platform. It's really interesting. It's kind of different from what HPE is doing. Instead of being focused on using Ethernet as the interconnect for all of their constituent components, it's basically a really fancy PCI Express switch sitting on top of your rack that you plug everything else into, and their secret software sauce dynamically puts together your system. Where it fits into the GPU thing, they're partnering with Nvidia to be able to put, I think it's up to 16 GPUs to a single physical CPU. The one limitation, not limitation, but the one stricture on this, as opposed to like a virtualization scheme, is that they can't do individual cores unless it's a single core processor. So you're limited to a quad or an 8-core processor, whatever the Intel chip that's in there. But composable infrastructure where you can, I mean, what's really interesting to me is reading some of the press releases. They kind of don't know what some of the engineering challenges are going to be once people put these into production, because it's never been possible to put that many GPUs on a single compute core. Is this the start of composable infrastructure being a thing, or is this something that's only going to be like really high-end ML, AI, maybe media applications?
I don't necessarily see those two things as being opposed to each other. I'm glad to see that someone is embracing composable infrastructure. I first heard about it a couple of years ago at HPE Discover in London, and my initial thought was this will be great if anybody other than HPE starts doing it, because we really need a solution that is cross-platform cross-vendor. But right now, I think that you're going to see a lot of people that are striking out to do that are going to be the ones who need insane amounts of GPU space and just enough CPU to boot the thing. But as the technology gets proven and as people start figuring out how to embrace it a little more thoroughly, you'll start to see it moving down the market and becoming more available. So, you know, it's a logical extension from the way that we buy things in AWS and Azure right now, where I'm buying a component piece machine. Well, why not just rent the individual pieces at some point?
Yeah. So, but the one thing I have is, as a networking guy, does it make you sad to see PCI Express versus, you know, preferred over Ethernet in this specific application?
Not at all, because when I started cutting my teeth in networking, I was a token ring guy. So
Wow.
I believe that technology should be used for the purposes that it's best suited for. And unfortunately, Ethernet seems to be the one thing that everybody wants to program to, and it's the most ill-suited for pretty much everything that isn't networking. I mean, look at iSCSI. Yeah, sure, we'll drop those storage frames. What's the worst that could happen? And if Stephen Foskett is watching this broadcast right now, he's probably going to scream at that.
Yeah, it is really interesting. It kind of gets back to a discussion we were having on Slack earlier today about how Slack itself is kind of trying to eat email. It's no longer trying to just be like you know, a supplement to email. It's trying to eat email by having shared teams and that kind of stuff. And it seems like Ethernet is the email of infrastructure, where it's like everyone's like, we should try and use that for as much as possible. And I think people are realizing, well, we don't need to have a control plane. We don't need to have separate hardware. It's more easy to parallelize if, you know, for some applications. So yeah, very interesting.
If I may quote Bob Metcalf from the original designers of Ethernet, I don't know what the future of networking is going to look like, but it's going to be Ethernet.
So next up, more on the pessimistic side as opposed to the aspirational, we have the DOJ making statements that strong encryption without backdoors is unreasonable. Now, looking at the actual statement, that headline is inflammatory, right? It's meant to make you mad. If you read the actual statements from them, it's a little more nuanced than that. I've seen some of the spokespeople for the DOJ, I think it's the Assistant Attorney General, I forget his name, was saying that, you know, he realizes like strong crypto, good, but in all you know, like kind of trying to make the side door or the backdoor argument a little more palatable by saying like, guys, I understand crypto's great, but obviously this is a big privacy issue in terms of looking at it from an enterprise perspective. If the DOJ takes a very firm stance on this, and we've had crypto wars before, they haven't gone, you know, crypto has won before. So I'm not saying it won't win now. But if there's some sort of legislation that comes across that says, hey, US companies, you have to have some sort of backdoors built into your crypto, is this only going to exacerbate data governance issues going forward, which we're already seeing being pushed by, you know, European Union legislation?
Absolutely. There are a lot of people that feel very uncomfortable with the idea that the US government can even see their data. I know that there are a lot of people who have started doing data governance, you know, keep your data anywhere but the US. And now if you're telling me that I have to build a backdoor into my encryption algorithms so that the US government can see things that I don't want other people to see, that does kind of put a very big tent pole in the middle of this argument. And I don't quite know how to say this, but the government agency that would probably be taking care of that, our famous National Security Agency, they seem to get hacked on a frequent basis and have all of their tools stolen. Anyone who's dealt with any of the recent spate of viruses that have been coming out and causing massive disasters, that was all built on NSA hacking technology. And what do you think would have happened if the NSA would have had a backdoor key into, say, iMessage, or the ability to hack Apple accounts because they were forced to do that? Do you think we would have seen viruses, or do you think we would have seen a whole lot worse?
Well, and, you know, kind of on the other side of this is there's a whole industry based around the ideas of network visibility, right? That being that, you know, having secure traffic is actually a big pain in the butt for a lot of organizations in terms of making sure that no malware comes through, making sure no ransomware comes through. We heard from I think it was a briefing from Gigamon, who has a business in this, saying that malware, only 20% of that is encrypted, or an incredibly low number. You would think that you would want, if you were making malware, for all of it to be encrypted. Does this also, though, open a business for companies like Gigamon that are in the visibility space, that have a vested interest in providing visibility to organizations? This is something that organizations want to find. Doesn't that to either find the backdoor, reverse engineer those backdoors to make it even easier to gain that kind of visibility?
Well, you would think that, right? Companies like Gigamon or Riverbed or Silver Peak that do a lot of WAN acceleration and things like that, they have a hard time with encrypted traffic. I know that at networking field day events earlier this year, that seemed to be the #1 question that we kept getting asked was, can you guys do any kind of packet inspection without doing man in the middle, which is what they do now. They essentially, the firewall kind of impersonates the endpoint and can crack the packets, and then it reassembles them. The biggest question that I would have is, okay, so let's say the feds do put a backdoor into encryption algorithms so that they can crack a TLS packet. Is reverse engineering that encryption a federal crime? And can you be in a world of trouble for even attempting to sniff that out?
Well, they should just get the RIAA to do that, because, as we all know, what is it? It's not illegal to make copies. It wouldn't be illegal for them to look at the traffic, but it would be illegal for them to break the encryption, or the DRM, or whatever you want to call it. Oh my God! Now I'm starting to think of encryption in terms of digital rights management of privacy, and that makes me really depressed.
You don't want to go down that slope. Just stop now.
All right, and then kind of a cool announcement coming out from Google. I think we're going to stick with a little bit of the machine learning theme here. They announced TensorFlow Light, which the idea of this is to, once you already have kind of a data set out there, to make machine learning inferencing very easy on either mobile or embedded, aka low power devices. Obviously, this would have to be ARM enabled or with some kind of special dedicated SoC. I know the new Google phones have some sort of dedicated hardware for machine learning applications. Is this just another step to take machine learning to the edge?
Yeah.
We're already hearing companies complaining that data is literally killing everything, and we're all going to die, and it's all noise, and we're never going to find the signal. Is this only going to accelerate that, or does that actually help make more sense of it?
Well, Google wants the flexibility because they're doing a lot of ML and AI stuff behind the scenes that nobody's seeing. And if they have a lot of compute power at the edge that they can reference and use, then they can kind of explode that into a lot more analytics. Now, of course, we won't ever get to see them, simply because Google tends to play its cards pretty close to the vest. I have a funny feeling this is going to be a lot involved with some of their projects around driverless cars and other things like that. So, hopefully it pays off for them. The other problem that I have with it is once Google announces a technology, it's a lot like Logan's Run. It now has an expiration date because they're going to sunset it. And well, if Google keeps on their schedule, they probably sunsetted it about 20 minutes ago, and there won't be a replacement. And then in 10 years, we'll find out that they really didn't have a plan for it at all.
Well, the only good thing with that is, I believe, if like TensorFlow itself, the parent project, that's an open standard, right, for anybody, theoretically for anybody to use. So, I could see this actually, though, having applications, maybe not for a Cisco, who probably would prefer to develop their own algorithms, but for some white box router or vendors or something like that, where they want to be able to extract machine learning insights on their hardware without having to kind of phone home, and just be able to send the finished product in for to be stored centrally. I could see that getting some applications for sure.
Yeah, I think that's where they're probably going to end up with it, and then eventually they'll package it and sell it as a service.
Yeah, this is one of those things where a lot of the headlines were saying that this is big time for mobile, but I actually think the embedded market is where it's a lot more interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so now we're going to do a quick rundown of some news stories. Those are kind of the bigger ones, and we're going to be calling this segment News or Snooze, because I like words. All right, first up, Tom, I need you to tell me news or snooze, and just a quick thought on the headline. All right. Amazon has agreed to sell its physical infrastructure in China to its local partner Beijing Sinet Technology to comply with local rules. News or snooze?
News, this is Amazon trying to get a foothold in China, and because of the way Chinese rules are, they have to sell to a local company. I'll be interested to see where this goes.
Yeah, they were, I was interested to see them, and Amazon and Microsoft are less than 9% of the total cloud market in China. So it'll be interesting to see if they can actually still compete in that market. I know a lot of technology companies have struggled. All right, news or snooze. Microsoft joins the MariaDB Foundation and will offer Azure-hosted managed version of it. News or snooze?
Snooze. If it's a software application that people are clamoring for with Azure, Microsoft pretty much has to bow to the whim of their customers. So not really a big thing.
All right, the answer to this is snooze, but CompuServe forums shutting down. Tom, news or snooze?
Sadly, it's a snooze, but it's a rest in peace kind of snooze. And I was when I saw the news last night, I was trying to dig through my my old emails to find my old CompuServe email address, and I couldn't come up with it. But I remember back in the day, to have a CompuServe.com email address was the bomb, yo.
I was looking through those forums, and the subject matter, they're actually surprisingly, like, there were recent posts on most of the major boards, but it was weird because, like, in like the home section, it'd be like gardening, food, science and technology. Like, they just clearly hadn't updated those overall arching categories in years.
Nope.
Next up, Qualcomm board unanimously rejects the Broadcom acquisition. Broadcom still wants to find a way to go forward, perhaps hostile acquisition. Don't know if they have the capital. Tom, news or snooze?
News. The chipset manufacturers are going to start consolidating, and if they have to do it with hostile takeovers, it's going to make a lot of people very upset.
Space launching on-demand, on-premises private cloud. Basically, they go in, they install your hardware, you get like a baseline of capacity, but then there's also a dark capacity, which gets awesome buzzword of the day in my book, that you can tap into on-demand pricing. Tom, news or snooze?
I think this is a snooze. Is the private cloud market, you're basically doing on-premises infrastructure as a service. I don't see this as being any more exciting than using AWS.
Well, and also, I mean, there's this to me is kind of like a response to Azure Stack. There's a company called Hypergrid that kind of does the same thing. So, I mean, obviously HPE kind of needs to be everywhere, but I don't know if it's all that compelling.
No.
And finally, Intel launching 3D XPoint DIMMs in the second half of 2018. Storage class memory. Tom, news or snooze?
This is news, if only because this is the Duke Nukem forever of enterprise technology. I believe that I've been asking Intel when 3D XPoint is going to launch, well, for the last 5 years, and the answer has always been soon. And
well, this year has been the year. We know we've seen low-end Optane, we've seen like dinky little 32 gigabyte things, we've seen super high-end NVMe kind of, or I guess PCI Express, not NVMe, cards coming in with under a terabyte of capacity. So this actually, to me, is the ideal application of this, right? Mm-hmm. You have massive. It doesn't have to be the fastest, but it can be, one, it's non-volatile, and two, you can put huge amounts of storage for data and other applications. I'd be interested to see for companies. I'm thinking specifically of Diablo Technologies, which kind of does kind of their own home baked version. It's not 3D XPoint, but it's basically putting giant NAND disks on with a small DRAM cache on the front of it. Be interesting to see how they respond to it. They've already kind of laid the groundwork and done some of the education for all their customers. So, obviously Intel has a huge OEM reach, so it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think it will.
All right, that just about does it for the Gestalt IT Rundown. Tom, thank you so much. Where can folks find more of your thoughts, writings, ramblings, and other good stuff?
Well, follow me on Twitter. Now that I have been enabled for 280 characters, there's twice the snark in the same amount of space. At Networking Nerd on Twitter. Blog is networkingnerd.net, and you can also see some of my think pieces on gestaltit.com.
And yeah, that's where you can find more of my stuff. I'm up there all the time. We have all new series coming out pretty much every day of the week. We have podcasts, the On-Premise IT Roundtable. If you're into some kind of more evergreen topics, check that out on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, whatever they decide to call it. And check us out, like Tom said, at gestaltit.com. We'll be back next Wednesday, every Wednesday, 12:30 live Eastern time. That's an order of words that got screwed up somewhere along the line there. And you'll get more pertinent IT news at that time. So until then, have a super sparkly day, everybody.